So this documentary, Three Identical Strangers, which is directed by Tim Wall. Now, the first thing to say about that is this. Do you remember when we talked about Searching for Sugar Man? Okay?
Yes.
Which is a documentary. I mean, obviously, in the case of any...
It's a number of years ago now.
Yeah. In the case of any documentary, if a documentary starts to attract attention, it's often the case that you will find out from the attention that the documentary gets stuff that is then revealed during the course of the documentary. So when I was reviewing Searching for Sugar Man, I said the best way to see this is to really not know anything about the story in advance, because if you do, there are certain twists and turns of the way the story is told that may seem sort of have less impact because you already know. So I'm assuming that a number of people already know a number of key facts about Three Identical Strangers. But I saw it cold, and so in reviewing it, I'm going to assume that people don't know any more than this. So I may well ending up saying less than people already know. But I think that's because I'm trying to talk about the way the film is constructed and the way the film tells its story, as opposed to what is already out there in the world. And obviously, it has been.
Yes, two of them were on 5 Live yesterday.
Fine. Yeah. Okay, so essentially, it starts with a young man remembering in 1980 his first day of college and going to college and turning up at college and having the strange experience of everyone that he met greeting him as if they knew him.
All these station wagons are dropping kids off. I was nervous. I just got to the school. I didn't know anybody. I was a freshman. I was never the captain of the football team in high school, so I was never really, popular. So I'm walking around trying to find where my dorm is. Meanwhile, all these people are coming up to me saying, "Hi, how are you?" "How was your summer?" "Mine was great. How was yours?" "Super." Why are they asking me how my summer was? I don't know. Everybody's being extremely friendly to me, and they're going out of their way to do it. I don't mean just a hi. I mean claps on the back and high fives. And I was a little bit bewildered by this because no one gets this kind of a welcome their first day at school. And girls were kissing me, fully kissing me, saying, "I'm so glad you came back." And I was saying thank you and hello back, but I had never been there before and I didn't know them.
So essentially, he's walking through a world in which people seem to know him. And the next thing that happens is someone says, were you adopted? And he says, yes. And he says, what's your date of birth? And he tells them, and he says, you're not going to believe this, but I think you have a twin brother who has been here at the university that everyone is confusing you with. And they find the guy, and lo and behold, there is a twin brother. And because the name of the film is Three Identical Strangers, it's not giving anything more than the title away to reveal that when that story about these two identical twins finding each other completely by accident, both had been adopted, very, very young, that a third person comes forward. And it turns out that there are three of them, that there are three identical strangers, three children who have been separated at birth and had been brought up by different adoptive families, who it turns out, one of which is a very blue-collar family, another of which is a kind of more middle-class family, another of which is a more affluent family. And despite the fact that they've had very different upbringings, they appear to have extraordinary amounts in common. The mannerisms, the way they talk, their taste in cigarettes. Turns out they all smoke the same brand of cigarettes. They start becoming a news phenomenon, going on news shows in which people ask whether they have the same taste in women. There's a lot of archive footage of this stuff, of them talking and sitting with their legs crossed in the same way and holding their hands in the same way, making the same kind of gestures. At this point now starting to wear the same clothes because it's starting to become a thing. And they become quite celebrated. They make a cameo appearance in the Madonna film, Desperately Seeking Susan. They become figures known out and about on the town, and then they start a business together. And all of this is kind of fairly well recorded, though I have to confess that I didn't know this story before I said it the same way I didn't know the story of Sugar Man beforehand. And so at the beginning, it's wow, this is remarkable. Wow, that's even more remarkable. But then what happens is that that's just the beginning. Questions start to arise. How were they adopted, and why weren't the parents told that there were three of them? is it mere coincidence that the ways in which they were placed into families seem to sort of, stretch across these social boundaries? And the documentary starts to uncover what looks more and more like a really bizarre conspiracy of silence. Now, the thing about it is that in the way that the film tells the story, on the one hand, it uses reconstructions, actually rather well done reconstructions. On the other hand, it uses modern interviews and also archive footage. And as I said, like Searching for Sugar Man, in the storytelling itself requires a certain withholding of facts and a certain assumption that you don't know this story already. And I'm watching this thing going, what? No, what? I mean, literally, like, no. And at every turn, the story takes another turn, and it goes from being one kind of movie into a different kind of movie. And the underlying theme, on the one hand, it's about nature nurture. It's about whether three people growing up in disparate lives will actually have similar personality traits. But then it becomes much more about how did this situation arise? And, how is it that they didn't know about each other? And why is it that they didn't know about each other? And it starts to pick away at the ethics of, investigation into psychological backgrounds and the ethics of how they. I mean, it's almost like they appear to be sort of part of some, weird ongoing experiment. And what I really liked about the film was that, on the one hand, there is it's an extraordinary story, but the secret of a good documentary isn't just an extraordinary story. It's the way in which you tell that story. It's the way in which you find the narrative that works for the film. And often when people review documentaries, what they're reviewing is the story itself. In the case of this, I thought it was a story that was really well told, because I watched it. I mean, at times, I was literally going, no, really? And I thought, on the one hand, it has this very interesting investigation of, the difference between, are your influences nature or nurture? But also behind it, there is this much darker, much stranger thing that, truth is stranger than fiction, unpicking the story behind them and finding this really kind of odd, sinister background to the story. And I thought it was really well made. I thought that what it managed to do was to take a story that had this many twists and turns, and there were enough people in the story who say, I thought that this in itself was astonishing, and then this next thing happened. Right from the very beginning, that two twins find each other, and then the astonishing thing is that it turns out that there's a third one. But that's only really like the first act of the film. And having established that, it then follows the rest of its story in a way which is really, really intriguing. I thought it was terrific. At times it was absolutely heartbreaking. I thought it was movingly done and very, very engrossing. As I said, I am certain that many people hearing this will already know more about the story than I'm saying. But to review it as a piece of filmmaking, I saw it knowing nothing at all. And the film led me through this. At times it's like a thriller. At times it has a real sort of psychological thriller narrative that it plays very well.